A rich man tortured his enemy for 6 months, but suddenly found that she is not the murderer of his sister, and even saved her own life. But who would have thought these were all Mary's dreams? He couldn't finish watching the video of his sister's life after all. It was so close to the moment of truth. Mike missed the truth. He turned off the computer that would determine Mary's fate. Then he went to the hospital room. He asked Mary why she was standing in front of him to save him, but at that moment Mary could not say anything. What a coincidence. The nurse came into the room. She needed to treat Mary's wound. Mike then turned around and left. He looked at himself in the mirror. He couldn't understand what was going on. However, when he returned to the room again, he saw a sneaky man was taking pictures of the room. Mike didn't say a word. He pushed him against the wall. After questioning, he found out that the person was a journalist. Mike told him to delete the photo, otherwise you will not leave here safely. After dealing with this matter, Mike returned to the hospital room again, but Mary's condition was still unstable. She needs 24-hour fluids. Mike was hesitant whether to avenge his sister's death now. After struggling with his thoughts, in the end, reason prevailed and did not do it to her. Mary finally opened her eyes after dawn. Mike, on the other hand, did not sleep the whole night. The first thing he said was, "Why did you save me?" Before Mary could say anything, the third sister just walked into the room. The conversation between the two was interrupted again. Mike cannot be angry, and the purpose of the third sister's visit was to thank Mary. "Thanks to you, not only did you save my brother, and you saved our family. I hope you will recover soon. I'll be waiting for you at home." Looking at his sister, so kind and understanding, Mike was a bit unnatural. He found an excuse to send his sister away. It was precisely these words that made Mary feel bad. She did all this to atone for her sins, but what did she know? Mike was so close to knowing the truth. After dropping off his sister, the nurse suddenly called him and asked him to check in. He was asked to provide Mary's ID. Then he came to the room to change the medication. The nurse asked Mike to help hold Mary's injured arm. This was the first time the two were close to each other. They were both a little embarrassed. Mary's heartbeat was inexplicably racing, and Mike was also afraid to look at Mary. Just when his phone rang, Mike then left the room. Mary looked at the necklace in her hand, remembering her dead friend again. Meanwhile, since her brother's death was a big blow to the rich girl, she no longer dared to hope to marry into a wealthy family. But her mother kept reassuring her, "We haven't lost completely yet. Tell the rich girl not to give up. Even if there is a glimmer of hope, they have to try." Hearing this, the rich girl showed a grim expression. Obviously she will not let Mary go easily. Mike looked at the wedding photos, thinking about what to do next. Just as the rich girl called, the first thing she said was that she was sorry. "I apologize for my brother." Mike didn't care about her. All he could think about was Mary. After getting Mary's ID back, Mike returned to the ward again. What he didn't expect was, Mike gave her back her ID card, but in Mike's mind, there was always a doubt. Why can you kill the second sister with heartlessness, but you can save me despite the danger? However, not only was he tormented by this incident, Mary's heart was also suffering. "If I had known that it was poison, I wouldn't have hesitated to eat the cake myself." Preview of the next episode. In order to take better care of Mary, Mike takes her to the country house. As they spend more time together, will Mike learn the truth? Wife is still recovering from gunshot wound. The husband was so cruel that he threw her out of the hospital. He didn't live in a luxury villa, but went to the countryside, 200 miles per hour car, on a dirt road. He said he could give birth to triplets this way. The wife was afraid, but did not dare to resist. The wound that had just been stitched up opened again. Coincidentally, her hand slipped. The necklace, which was very important to her, fell out of the car. No matter what she did, she couldn't get it. This scene was seen by Mike, although he didn't say much on the surface, but he slowed down the car. He picked up the necklace and put it on his shirt. The two then arrived at the mansion, but the long bumpy ride to the mansion made Mary a little tired. Mike called for a long time, but did not respond. He had to unbuckle his seatbelt and carry her into the villa himself. To let Mary rest, Mike helped her to take off her shoes, but he didn't expect to wake Mary up. At this moment, both of them were a little embarrassed. Mary was about to get up, but she was stopped. Mike pretended not to care and said, "You should rest well," and then he turned around and left. Since Mike had instructed his man, there was no need for a maid in the mansion. He had to take care of Mary himself. This sudden change of events, Mary was a bit overwhelmed. Mike was about to give her medication, but the phone suddenly rang. After a moment of hesitation, he came out to answer the phone. The first thing Ruth said was, "Where are you now? Why don't you go home?" But Mike knew exactly what she was up to. "I'm afraid she was worried that the reporters would catch her on camera. Will cause unnecessary trouble again." Thinking of this, Mike said coldly, "Don't worry about it. I want to take care of my wife here." Before Ruth could say anything, Mike hung up the phone. But the more Mike did this, the more suspicious Ruth became. She even began to think, what was Mary's purpose in saving Mike's life? But what did she know? Mary did it only to atone for her sins. Although she had been treated, she was still very weak. Mary was about to take her medicine. Mike came back and saw her. He grabbed the glass of water. "I told you not to get up. You need to get some rest now." Then he handed Mary the glass of water. Although Mike didn't care on the surface, but he didn't want Mary to be the one who killed her sister. Mary was just about to fall asleep, but she was awakened by a shout. Then she puts on her shoes and looks around the mansion. She found a stray dog that had been injured. A person as kind as Mary, even if it was an animal, she would try to save it. Unbeknownst to her, this one act, but once again caused Mike's displeasure. He warned Mary not to touch anything in the mansion, because this floor is the second sister's favorite place. She had no right to touch it. Mary Mary had no way to argue with this comment. After that, Mike went outside. He saw a stray dog. He then realized it turns out that Mary went through the stuff just to save him. Mike realized that he had gone too far. But just then, accidents happen again. The rich girl is still determined, deliberately let her mother spy on the news. But what she didn't expect was, Ruth didn't want to talk to her at all, even though she and Mike didn't get along. The shooting had hit her bottom. Then she put the housekeeper on the phone. A few simple words, but the more Ruth took that attitude, the more the rich girl's competitive nature was stirred up through her spies in the mansion. Mike had taken Mary to the country house. The rich girl is now a bit anxious. Her mother was there to reassure her at such a critical time. They must not be left alone together. And the implication of this statement, she told the rich girl to go to the villa in the countryside, pretending to apologize for her brother, deliberately approaching to look for opportunities. What a coincidence, she had just arrived outside the mansion. She overheard Mike and Mary talking, but Mike doesn't even notice. To Mary, she wonders, you killed my sister in cold blood, and now you're saving me despite the danger. What kind of person are you, and why did you do this? At this moment, the rich girl showed a shocked expression. Did she hear the conversation or not? Next episode preview. Under the care of Mike, Mary's health is gradually recovering. One day when they were about to go out, Mary slipped and fell. In order to avenge his sister, the boss spends millions on a flash marriage with his enemy in order to torment her for the rest of her life. He didn't know that the woman was not the one who killed his sister, so the boss will take it out on her every day. But their conversation is overheard by outsiders. Mike stares coldly at the rich girl. He's not sure how much she's heard, and the rich girl pretended to be understanding. She said the reason she came here so suddenly, she wanted to apologize to Mike for her brother. She didn't expect the shooting to happen, but Mike didn't care about it. Tell the rich girl not to think too much. If there's nothing else, you can go. But the rich girl came for a different reason. Suddenly there was a change of scenery. If she needs to take care of Mary, she can stay. Mike didn't even want to talk about it. He arranged for his men to send her away. Then Mike made a meal, but still no good attitude. Mary just said thank you. And again, she was ridiculed. You think I'm being nice to you? It's only because you got hurt that the wedding didn't happen. You'll have to marry me when you're better. After saying that, he left the room. Mary was left frozen in place. Although Mike did not admit it on the surface, but he seems to have a selfish desire to protect Mary. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so concerned. How much of the conversation the rich girl heard? He was worried about Mary's identity being known by her mother. But who would have thought? The rich girl didn't hear the conversation. She told her mother her doubts. At that time, she saw that Mary was crying very hard. She didn't understand what the reason was, and judging from Mike's reaction, should be very angry with Mary. But the rich girl could not understand. It was obvious that Mary saved her life, but why is Mike still accusing her? Now the rich girl will not let Mary go easily. She wants to dig out the secret between the two. But Mary doesn't know anything about all this. Suddenly she remembered the stray dog outside. Although Mike had told her to stay off the floor, to rest in bed, but good Mary went outside anyway. She thought Mike was asleep. She was just about to open the door when she was called. Mike thought Mary was going to run away. Then he said coldly, I know what kind of person you are. Don't think you can leave my hands. When you're cured, you'll really be my wife, and you will only be by my side for the rest of your life. It was only at this moment that Mary realized she was already in the palm of Mike's hand. All she could do was accept it, and when she woke up, she suddenly found Mike secretly put the necklace on the table. Mary felt a little better when she thought about it, because for her, it was given to her by her friend before he was killed. It was more like a spiritual support. Even if she had to stay with Mike forever to atone for his sins, Mary was willing to do so. As she recuperated during this time, her health had improved. Thinking of Mike's favorite coffee, Mary skillfully poured out the coffee beans. The sound of stirring caught Mike's attention, but this time he didn't accuse Mary of touching anything. He had told her to rest, to prevent the wound from reopening, but Mary didn't care. I'm fine now. I just wanted to make you a cup of coffee. Mike couldn't say much more. Apparently, as they spent more time together, Mike didn't realize his attitude toward Mary was slowly changing, and that's when Mike got another call. A cousin's case needed to be handled. They were to appear as victims. Mary goes to her room to change, while Mike waits outside. When he saw Mary in her long dress, Mike actually lost his concentration. At this moment, the two of them look at each other. To avoid embarrassment, Mike was ready to go. Mary just tripped and fell on the steps. Without thinking too hard, Mike rushed to hold her up. The atmosphere was a bit awkward for a while. It was obvious that they both wanted to look at each other, but neither could look at the other. Then they went to the police station, but the cousin was still very arrogant. He said that Mike was lucky this time. He had found a woman from somewhere to take the bullet for him. Mike didn't give up either, but the conversation between them made Mary a little worried. She always had a feeling. She had a feeling that her cousin had a way to hurt Mike, so he'd been taught a lesson by Mike. He'd been holding a grudge. He was always looking for a chance to take revenge. After that, he approached the company's finance department. Under his deliberate guidance, finance revealed that when Mike went to Africa, he used a large amount of money. It seems to be to buy a slave. Now the cousin used this as an excuse to deliberately bite Mike back. This also aroused the suspicion of the police. When Mary was subsequently questioned, the police suspected that she was forced to block the gun, asking her if she was threatened and imprisoned. If Mary nodded yes, Mike would face serious punishment. Seeing that Mary was still hesitant, the police continued to question her. At this point, Mary's mind began to wander. Mike's torturing controlling behavior. Mike thought Mary would tell the truth, but the next words shocked him. Mary looked at Mike with great affection. "I am his fiancé, and no one forced me." Then she held Mike's hand again. Preview of the next episode. After this incident, Mike is gradually changing his mind about her. As Mary recovers, the unfinished wedding takes place again.
A wife who is often beaten only needs to nod her head. She can send her tormentor husband to jail. But when questioned by the police, the woman said she loved her husband and had married him of her own free will. Once again, Mary's testimony helped Mike get away with murder, and the cousin's report was found to be a false accusation. Mike, of course, would not let him off the hook. He looked at his former bag boy. Now he hates himself so much. Mike was furious. He threatened his cousin. He told him to stop hitting on Mary, or he would make him disappear. But Mike didn't tell Mary about it, although he seemed just as cold as before. But there was a tenderness in his words. He told Mary not to be afraid of anyone, because he only needs to atone for his sins to Mike. No one else has the right to hurt Mary. Then they returned to the mansion. Ruth was already waiting in the lobby. Apparently she had a lot to say to Mike. Because of the shooting, the wedding didn't go through. Ruth thought Mary would bring misfortune to the family, so she was going to announce to the public she's not going to go through with the rest of the wedding, which means she won't let Mike marry Mary. This is obviously a good thing for Mary, but she felt a strange sense of loss. Maybe Mary didn't realize when she was able to take the bullet for Mike despite the danger. That's all that matters. Her feelings for Mike. It's not just about atonement. And that's when the maid came into the room and told Mary that she was ready to get dressed, although she didn't know why she was moving from here. But the maid wished Mary well. She said she had grown up with Mike, although he looked cold on the outside. In reality, he is a very good man. See here also from the side to show. If Mike knew the truth about his sister's murder, he will definitely compensate Mary twice. He becomes a gentle master who dotes on his wife. But what Mary never expected was the two of them just returned to the suburban house. Mike opened his mouth and said, "I want to marry you today." No one could object. These sudden words, Mary was a little confused, and this time Mike did not intend to invite outsiders. Even Ruth didn't know, but Mike was the only one who told his sister. What a coincidence. The rich girl was about to get some information. She overheard the third sister and Mike on the phone. This time she heard something. It seems to be about someone's wedding. Looking at her anxious face, the rich girl vaguely guessed the general situation, and Mike can make this decision, and it took a lot of courage. He didn't know how to face Mary. The old man knew his fears well. Tell Mike not to think too much. The woman who was willing to give her life to save you would never harm you. But Mike still had some hesitation. Interestingly enough, the third sister just arrived at the mansion. Before Mike could say anything, three sisters came forward to congratulate him. For as long as she could remember, Mike has been taking care of the family. Seeing her brother working so hard, she could not help but feel some pain in her heart. But after Mary appeared, third sister suddenly felt a sense of peace of mind. From now on, someone can finally take care of big brother. This help from her sister undoubtedly gave Mike a firm idea. But who would have thought that the rich girl would follow him to the countryside? The first time she contacted her mother, she was now in a state of confusion. She didn't know what to do. The two of them, after clearing their minds, guessed that Ruth did not know about it. Hearing this, the rich girlfriend had an idea, so they texted Ruth. We can only hope that Ruth will be able to do it. It was clear that a crisis was looming. At this point, Mary is very nervous. The thought of actually marrying Mike. She's also a little panicked. Just then, the third sister comes into the room. Then she started to help. In this family, no one in the family wanted Mary to be her sister-in-law more than she did. Then she told Mary to relax. As a woman, she understood the feeling. When the wedding was done, they would be family. The moment Mary got dressed, Mike felt something he had never felt before. At that moment, the two of them looked at each other. Each was a little nervous about the other. The old man saw the scene, although he didn't know what was going on between them, but he could feel that both of them cared for each other very much, even if the wedding wasn't a grand affair. But for Mary, it was the most important day of her life. As the wedding went on, Mike actually smiled inadvertently. Then the priest began to read the testimony. Will you marry the man in front of you? Mary's eyes were already full of tears. Everyone was waiting for these words, but the rich girl couldn't wait. Finally, Ruth arrived, and so it was. Two people with separate agendas, but with a common goal. Then they rushed to the mansion, and by now Mary had already said her answer.
Evet.
Then the priest looked at Mike. Do you take the woman before you to be your wife?
Evet.
The old man and the third sister were witnesses. Then they signed the paper. Just as the wedding was about to end, accidents happen again. She did not graduate from elementary school, but was able to marry into a rich family. A long dress to see the domineering president straight gulp. But the billionaire CEO never thought. The slave he bought was so stunning after dressing up. But his mother did not approve of the marriage. She thinks the girl from a humble background is not worthy of entering the rich family. But who would have thought? The bossy president took the initiative to kiss in front of his mother. And the reason he did so, to prove that the woman I love. It's useless for you all to object. But after her mother's scolding, the third sister felt very sorry for herself. She felt that she had accidentally disrupted the wedding today. But she couldn't couldn't figure out. Why did her mother have such an attitude? After all, Mary had saved Michael's life despite the danger. Did her mother only see money? Did poor people not deserve to marry into their family? Seeing her sister so understanding, it was a great relief for Michael. But he still didn't say who Mary really was. He didn't want anyone to know. Mary had something to do with her second sister's murder. But what did he know? Mary was innocent from the beginning to the end. Although it was a marriage without feelings. But for a woman, it is the most important thing in her life. Mary didn't want to marry the man she loved. And that's when Mike came to her alone. He was back to his cold attitude. Marriage is a better way to torture you. I'll be around for the rest of my life. So don't get your hopes up. Pay for what you've done. And with that he turned and left, leaving Mary alone with tears. And the old man saw the scene in his eyes. He could see the goodness in Mary. Then he began to tell the story of Mike. Although he looked cold on the outside, but in reality he was a warm-hearted person. The old man knew this very well. He told Mary not to be angry with Mike. Now he couldn't understand it. With more time together, Mike will definitely see Mary for who she is. Then the two of them went into the house. They ran into his third sister, who was about to leave. He looked at the picture of his sister. If she were still alive, Tavern would have thought the same thing I did. I'm just as happy to have you in the family. But Mike heard all of that, and then he looked at Mary and put it all on her head. Another excuse for his third sister to leave. When he faced his sister, Mike's face was full of tenderness. Before leaving, the third sister was still blessing the two. No matter how much her mother opposed, she would support Mary. The old man also said something profound. Always cherish the person in front of you. If you lose them, they won't come back. Time will tell all the answers. Obviously these words were meant for Mike's ears. But before they left, Mike was back to his cold attitude. He looked at the marriage certificate in his hand. Mary, on the other hand, was afraid to speak. Then she slowly approached. But the more he did so, the more unnatural Mary became. And then, coincidentally, the phone rang. When Mike left, Mary was relieved. But this was only the first day of their marriage. It was clear that the rest of the day was not going to be easy. When Mike returned, Mary scrambled to her feet. To ease the awkwardness between them, she asked Mike if he would like some coffee. And Mike stared at her coldly, and then held out his arm.
Odaya git. Beni bekle.
Mary was a bit confused by this sudden comment, but she had to follow Mike's orders, and she went back to her room. And Mary had very mixed feelings. When she first heard that Ruth had called off the wedding, she was actually disappointed. But now that she was actually marrying Mike, she felt more nervous than ever. And then she heard Mike on the phone. He gave him 10 minutes to take care of the problem. And that seems like 10 minutes. For Mary, it was a long time. But what she doesn't realize is that everyone thought she was a schemer. The rich girl was taking advantage of the opportunity to chatter to Ruth, but Ruth didn't want to talk about it, even though they both had the same goal. Now that Mike was married, so there was no point in talking to the rich girl. She had to think about what to do next. When the third sister returned to the mansion, Ruth still didn't have a good attitude. The simple girl does not know Mike and her mother's conflict, and naively thought that her mother was only prejudiced against Mary, didn't know about her father, and Ruth didn't tell the truth. All this is Mike's revenge on himself. After hanging up the phone, Mike looked at the closed door of the room. He went in after all. Mary was too scared to turn around. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. Next episode preview. Mike takes Mary back to the mansion, deliberately acting very affectionate, but in doing so, they can only sleep in one room. To avenge the death of his sister, the domineering president married the enemy of the enemy, unaware that the poor girl is not the real killer. She was tortured for 6 months. She knew she was in the palm of the domineering man's hand. Mary's heart starts to beat faster. What a coincidence. That's when Mike got the call. His mother suddenly fell ill. There was no time to think. Mike rushed back to the mansion with Mary. In the doctor's mouth, he learned that the patient needs more rest now. She should not be subjected to strong stimulation. But it seemed to Mike that the mother was faking it on purpose. The funny thing is, the mother and son seemed like strangers. Ruth was still chattering, complaining that she shouldn't have married Mary, but Mike didn't care. He just said to get some rest and left. Not only does she want to torment Mary, she's going to use the marriage to get back at her mother. Poor Mary has to be involved in the family feud, the victim of this game. But luckily, there's finally a normal person in the family. The third sister is very nice to Mary. The two of them often talk together. There was nothing like the daughter of a rich family. Looking at such a kind girl, Mary could not help but think of her dead friend. She blamed herself for everything. Just when she was in the middle of blaming herself, the mansion was suddenly filled with flowers. Mike said in front of the housekeeper, "This is all for my wife. Whatever Mary likes, I'll move it back to the mansion." Apparently, this was all said on purpose, so that the housekeeper would tell my mother. The more she opposed the marriage, the more Mike acted happy. While tormenting Mary and Ruth, he was also living in pain. When no one was around, Mike changed his attitude again. He says to Mary, "Don't think I love you. You're not entitled to this." Hearing these cold words, Mary could only shed tears alone. What a coincidence. This scene was watched by the third sister. She sensed that something was wrong. Then she approached Mike alone. She told him her doubts. Hearing this, Mike began to act. Take Mary's hand in front of her third sister. Tell her sister not to listen to other people's nonsense. In this life, to meet Mary, I'm afraid it's the happiest thing in his life. He also said that he liked Mary's coffee the most. Then he said something meaningful. Even if there was poison in it, he would not hesitate to drink it. Apparently, this confession of affection had allayed his sister's fears. He knew Ruth was watching. He sat Mary aside again and pretended to be affectionate. And that's not all. At dinner, he sat Mary at the table. Mike offered to serve him food, but when the butler left, Mike was back to normal again. He stopped talking to Mary, but this behavior seemed to Ruth. It was a provocation to him. A mere servant, now sitting in the hall eating. This was something he would not tolerate. With this in mind, he made an important decision.
since Mike wanted to start a war. Then she would be happy to go to the end. But what did she know? Mike was taunting Mary right now. This mansion has hosted many guests. There's never been anyone like you, with blood on your hands. Hearing this, Mary was a little nervous. She coughed unconsciously. Mike picked up a glass of water and handed it over. And this scene was seen by Ruth. She suppressed her anger. She sat between them. At this moment, the three of them were a bit awkward. Ruth thought back to Mary's face. Now she was eating at the same table with herself. She instantly lost her appetite. And Mike was not shy. He deliberately fiddled with the wedding ring in front of Ruth. In this war without smoke and mirrors, innocent Mary was embarrassed, even though she tried to avoid making mistakes. But Mike kept reminding her that she would always be a sinner. Seeing that it was almost time for bed, Mike asked her to follow him upstairs, so the two of them didn't take a step forward or backward. It was torture for Mary. She had thought about atonement countless times, but never in this way. Mike opened the room slowly, and then looked at her with interest, and Mary could never make up her mind. But she didn't have a choice. She was at the mercy of the world. Next episode preview. Ruth is seriously ill in hospital. Everyone is blaming Mary for the mismatched wedding, but to the outside world, Mike has always defended her. Cinderella flash marriage dominant president but was asked to immediately pregnant. The birth of a child is rewarded 100 million, but she was not happy. However, just as she was about to walk into the room, accidents happen again. Her mother-in-law unexpectedly fainted. They didn't have time to think about it and rushed to the hospital. The doctor had to conduct a detailed examination to know the cause of the fainting. Unbeknownst to them, it was all intentional by the talented mother-in-law. She wanted to destroy the life of her son and daughter-in-law. She also said she didn't want to see outsiders. She just wanted her family to be with her. The implication is that Mary is an outsider. This makes Mike very helpless. Seeing Ruth in this state, he could not say anything more. Mary had to go outside alone. This scene was watched by the third sister. She rushed out to comfort Mary. She said that her mother had always been like this. She told Mary not to be angry with her, but at that moment, the spy in the mansion dialed the rich girl's phone. She told her about Ruth's hospitalization. The rich girl is not acting very well. She is completely disappointed in Ruth, but the mother doesn't see it that way. This is an opportunity for them to take advantage of it, suggesting to win Ruth's favor. The woman then arrives at the hospital. She saw Mary outside, and she says, "It's because you married Mike." His mother suddenly fell ill. "I don't understand how a lowlife like you can marry into a rich family." But when she walked into the room, she immediately changed her face. She rushed forward to comfort her. She thought she could get a good impression, but Mike was very indifferent to her. She was told to put the flowers down and leave immediately. But as soon as Mike said that, Ruth stopped her. "Tell Mike to go outside." She wanted to talk to her best friend. Mike didn't say much about it. When he came out, he told Mary to go back to the mansion. She wasn't needed here for a while. Before Mary left, the third sister came to the side with a glass of water and described to Mike what had just happened. Mary was alone with her tears. He told Mike to go back and comfort Mary. After all, marriage is a matter for two people. You have to support each other. Mike was a domineering man on the outside, but he listens to his sister. He could imagine Mary's sad face. He actually felt a little sad when he thought about it, although it was a revenge marriage. But the torture is mutual, and who can get out of it? When Mike finds out the truth, I'm afraid he'll regret what he did now. He returned to the mansion at dawn. The housekeeper rushed up to inquire. Mike didn't even want to talk to him, but it was precisely this attitude that upset the housekeeper. This also set the stage for future conflicts. When Mike returned to the bedroom, he found Mary sleeping on the couch all night. Mike looked at their wedding rings. He wanted to tell her to go to bed, but he didn't know how to say it. Maybe in his heart he didn't want to admit he had a crush on Mary, but he couldn't get past himself. Whenever he thought of his second sister's death, Mike can only hide this feeling in his heart. When Mary woke up and found the clothes on the bed, that's when she realized that Mike was back. Just then, the maid came into the room. Mary asked her where Mike was. Then she found out from the maid that Mike had just returned. She didn't want to disturb her rest. After changing her clothes, she rushed to the hospital. That's why she was in such a hurry. She wanted to talk to Ruth alone. The two of them were no longer pretending. They argued about Mary's problems. Ruth told Mike to get a divorce. Otherwise, she would not be nice to Mary. To Ruth's great surprise, Mike actually nodded in agreement. But there was one caveat. What Ruth had taken from him, she had to give it back intact. That is, unless her dead father comes back to life. Ruth would never say such things again. The more Ruth cares about being noble, the more he had to erase that sense of superiority. Once again, the two of them broke up. After an examination, Ruth's health was intact. Just as she was about to leave the hospital, the rich girl and her mother came to visit. They even took Ruth back to the mansion themselves. But what she didn't expect was, the family was preparing a party. Unbeknownst to her, Mike had planned it. She knew Mike couldn't be that kind, guessing he was going to do something with the party. The only person who could have embarrassed herself was Mary. What a coincidence. The maid almost runs over Mary. The kind-hearted Mary didn't think much of it, ready to help put the dishes away, and Mike saw the scene. He then said out loud in front of everyone, Next episode preview. Mike makes a high-profile appearance with Mary to introduce to the guests in attendance. Mary is the love of his life. Cinderella lived for 20 years, but first makeup, although she was a maid of humble origin, but showed the temperament of no less than celebrities, and wears a limited edition dress worth millions. In the eyes of outsiders, she is the young wife of a top tycoon. But who would have thought that she was the rich man's sworn enemy? When Mike saw the dressed up Mary, not only did he not feel happy at all, instead, he mocked the fact that your hands were covered in blood, just like the red nail polish on the floor. In the face of such an outrageous comment, Mary did not dare to retort. Yet when they showed up at the party, they pretended to be a loving couple. Mike showed up holding her hand in a high-profile manner. He wanted everyone to see and Mary's love, and Mike reminds her to do your acting. Act like you're happy. But strangely enough, the plutocratic mother-in-law was not happy, because the Macs are so well known in the area. The people who came were all celebrities. But just then, something unexpected happened again. The rich girl was desperate to give up Mike, but her mother kept encouraging her. Now we have a chance. We can see that Ruth does not like the girl, so we have to use that to drive a wedge between them. And that's exactly what the party is for tonight. He's going to show Mary for what she is. That's it. The rich girl's mother found the right moment to humiliate her, asking Mary what her bracelet was made of, with the intention of watching her make a fool of herself. But to the woman's surprise, Mary was able to tell in detail the material and origin of the bracelet. This scene made everyone very impressed, because there are many styles of diamonds, not to mention a servant like Mary. Even a rich girl couldn't distinguish in detail, but now Mary was able to answer all the questions. This also made Mike look good. The guests complimented his wife not only on her beauty, but he also had his doubts. How did Mary know all this? But he didn't have time to think about it. An important guest had arrived at the mansion. The man was an official based in Africa. When he saw Mary, he had a feeling of familiarity. He asked if we had met somewhere before. For a moment Mike was a little nervous, but then Mary's words shocked him completely. Mary said without panic she had been to a painting exhibition. She might have seen it by chance. Then she went on to name the works of famous painters. She didn't hide her love for them, and that's exactly what women like to do. The two of them had a very good conversation. They didn't suspect Mary's identity. Mike was relieved when the other party left. He secretly asked Mary, "How do you know all this? Not only do you know about diamonds, but you also know how to paint." Mary did not say much about this, just casually said her long-dead parents was an employee in the related industry. But judging from Mary's expression, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Her identity may not be what Mike understands either. Mike's main focus was on the party today. If he could make Ruth unhappy, he had achieved his goal, so he didn't notice anything unusual about Mary. As the party went on, people kept coming up to congratulate him. They all praised Mary, although Mike was very happy, but he still kept mocking Mary. They're really innocent, aren't they? Who would have thought that? Such a pretty girl on the outside. What a vicious person she is behind the scenes. Then Mike called a reporter on purpose. He asked him to take a picture of the two of them. He could publish it on the news. Mike remembered what Ruth said before the party started. He was even more furious when Ruth tried to reconcile with him, accusing Mike of taking a maid as his wife. If the whole country knew about it, you'll ruin the family's reputation that I've defended for years. Don't you care at all? Hearing this, Mike is no longer in control. When you drove my father away, have you considered my feelings? Now this game is just beginning. I'm going to make you pay the price you deserve. For Mike, he never had a father's love since he was a child. It was the most painful thing in his life, and the backdrop he chose for his photo shoot, where Ruth and her father used to take pictures. Until this moment, Ruth realized how determined Mike is to get back at himself. Next episode preview, Mike continues to show his love, and so it goes. Innocent Mary is forced into the battle of the gentry, but it seems her true identity is not so simple either. On the surface, they are a loving couple, but the wife is a servant in the eyes of her husband, and the reason for this party is just a means of revenge against the mother. But who would have thought that the seemingly weak girl, the real identity, is not so simple? Under the eyes of the crowd, two people slowly came to the center. Interestingly enough, this is the first time since they got married that they are close to each other. Mike's eyes were always on Mary, but Mary was afraid to look away. The guests were all looking at each other with admiration. It wasn't just that Mary had married into a rich family, it was because the handsome young man loved her so much. With a round of applause, the two of them also finished the dance. Everything looked normal on the surface, but Mike seemed to have something more in his heart. Once he thought he had nothing but hate for Mary, even if the marriage was just to torture her. As they got more and more in touch, Mike could not control himself more and more. But when he thought of his second sister who had died, he could only bury this feeling deep in his heart. What a coincidence! The party he threw today, Mary became famous. Even though all the guests were dignitaries, they all praised Mary, but the more they did so, the worse Ruth's mood became. A servant of humble origin. What right did she have to marry into her family? When the guests were sent away, Ruth approached Michael alone, but what she didn't expect was Mary came into the room with her. Ruth gave her a sideways glance and told her to get the hell out of the room, but Mike stopped her. "This is my wife. You don't get to talk to her like that." Ruth saw this and stopped controlling. "What you did today, you've gone beyond my boundaries. You're trampling on my dignity with impunity." And Mike doesn't give a damn about her. The saddest thing in his life was not being able to fight back when he was a child. How else could he have lost his father? Seeing the argument getting more and more heated, he caught the attention of his third sister. Mary saw this and quickly reminded them. The simple girl did not know. Brother and mother have irreconcilable conflict. conflicts. Unlike Ruth, Mike is very gentle with his sister. He quickly changed the subject. He said that his mother was going to the suburban villa for a break. He advised his mother to stay here. That's why they argued. Then he asked his third sister to help him pack his bags. Stay with Ruth for a few days. That's how he avoided the conflict. Before she left, Ruth had a grim look on her face. Mike is also not weak, and poor Mary could only stand by. After everyone had left, only 2 people were left in the large villa. Mike slowly walked towards Mary. The first thing he said was to take off your disguise. Now there is no one else around. Even my mother doesn't know. You're a murderer, even if you pretend to be. This marriage is your punishment. In the face of Mike's accusations, Mary didn't even dare to argue with him, but the next words sent her to the bottom again. Now go clean yourself up. It would be time for bed in a few minutes. What was to come after all. Mary went to the bathroom, disoriented, even though she didn't want to face it, but she couldn't escape Mike's grasp. Just as she was about to accept it, she saw that the door to the balcony was open. She hesitated for a moment to go out on the balcony alone, but there was a cool breeze blowing. Mary was about to go back to her room when Mike saw her. In this moment, the two are no longer a loving couple. With Mike approaching, Mary was reminded of the memories of her torture. Thinking about it, her eyes were filled with fear. Looking at Mary's aggrieved look, Mike was even more furious. Then he picked up the glass of water and slammed it on the ground. It was obvious that Mary was the one who caused all this, and now she was pretending to be the victim. Then he told Mary to go into the room right now. Until this moment, Mary finally realized no matter what she did wouldn't change the hate Mike had for her. This night was destined to be the most memorable day of her life, and Mike was watching her with great interest. Next episode preview. Although Mike wanted revenge, but in the end he didn't do anything too much to Mary. I am also very anxious to see this. Let's look forward to the next episode. In order to let his wife give birth to triplets, husband actually let her sleep on the floor every night. The -20-degree temperature makes women curl up into a ball, while the domineering husband was lying in a warm bed. Until late at night the woman still cannot sleep. The same goes for the dominatrix. Although Mike clearly stated even if they were the only 2 people left in the world, he would not touch her. But when he saw Mary's poor face, he felt a little bad, but he couldn't say it out loud because he was ashamed. Just then, a cool breeze came. The photo on the bed blew over. Mary was about to pick it up, but Mike stopped her. You have no right to touch anything here. Mary didn't argue with that. She knew it was her own fault. She looked at the picture of her dead friend. She had to bear it all in silence. But the more Mike did this, Mary felt more and more remorseful. Even the simple act of sleeping was a torture for her. She even woke up suddenly with nightmares. Mike just looked at her coldly. Every day you live from now on, you have to pay for your mistakes every day you live. Although he still treats Mary in the same way on the surface, but from the way he acted last night, Mike had a little more heart for her. But in the back of Mary's mind, Mike's words kept coming back to her while she was lost in thought. Mike suddenly appeared behind her. Mary rushed forward to apologize. This time Mike didn't say much. He just told Mary to clean up the place. He needed to see her. But when Mary went into the room, she found Mike getting ready to change his clothes. Then he looked at Mary. You have to get me dressed every day from now on. It's your job as a wife. Just as Mike's friend called, Mary was listening in. Seeing that he was hesitant to do anything, Mike was about to do it himself, but almost collided with each other. In this moment, the two were a little awkward, but that's not all. The caller was still talking. Mary hesitated for a long time, finally reached out and tried to tie Mike's shirt for him, and this seemingly ordinary gesture, but Mike was a little shy. Then he hung up on his friend and asked Mary what she was doing, but as soon as the words came out, Mike regretted it. He excuses himself from Mary by saying he needs coffee, but just as he was about to go to the kitchen, but then there was a ringing at the door. Mary opened the door and saw there was a bouquet of flowers. He thought it was from Mike, but what he didn't expect was that Mike hadn't ordered them at all. Mike slammed the flowers on the floor. Do you think you're really the daughter-in-law of a rich family? It was just a wish from some friends. These words brought Mary back to reality, but before she could react, she found the water boiling. Mary accidentally burned her hand. What a coincidence. This scene was again seen by Mike. Out of instinctive reaction, pulled Mary over, quickly cooled down with cool water. At this time, Mike's heart is also very torn. Whenever he thought of his second sister, he hated her. But once you see Mary hurt and inevitably some heartache, before he left he only said one thing: no one but me can let you get hurt. See here, we can easily guess. Mike now only needs a reason to love Mary. Mike asked Mary to write down her first and last name. There is a local custom. Once a woman marries a man, the man's surname will be in front of her name. Seeing that Mary had written it down without hesitation, Mike inevitably became suspicious. You really think of yourself as a rich wife? Did you marry me because of my wealth? It's funny when you think about it. For a murderer like you, it's impossible for a murderer like you to be true to someone else. Apparently he was looking for a reason not to fall in love with Mary, but then the accident happened again. After the last party, the rich girl was completely devastated. She's not as pretty as Mary. She doesn't even know as much as she does. The thought of her beloved man being taken away by a woman from an unknown source. She was furious, but she didn't know that on the surface they looked like they were in love. In reality, Mary's life was worse than hers. Seeing her daughter in such pain, the mother once again came up with a solution, and that was to start with Ruth again. Through a spy in the mansion, Mary's true identity is a slave. Combined with the information that her son had told her, Mike even spent a lot of money to buy Mary back from Africa. But for all this, Mike never mentioned it to Ruth. Now all he had to do was tell Ruth about it and wait for his chance. Sure enough, when Ruth found out the news, she went back to the mansion without saying a word. Then she pushed open the door and said, "Göre pazarında esir bir kızın nasıl bıçaklıyorsun?" Next episode preview. Mike doesn't want to reveal Mary's true identity, but Ruth is already suspicious. If he knows that Mary is the one who killed his daughter, what will Ruth do to fight back? She had to kneel down every day when she saw her husband. She has to sleep on the cold floor. She had to get up at 3 a.m., take care of her husband's food and living. But the more she did this, the rich husband didn't care. Even her mother-in-law was always making things difficult for her. When she found out that she was a slave bought by her son, considering it a stain on the family, ordered them to get a divorce. Unbeknownst to her, Mike had already made his decision. From now on she is no longer a slave. As long as I'm around, no one will bully her. This conversation also ended unhappily, but Mike had a question in his mind. How did mother know? Mary's identity was known only to her cousin. When he thought of the rich girl, he quickly cleared his mind. He found an excuse to send Mary away. Then he called his men. It turns out that Mike's intelligence is always online. Although he hadn't watched the whole video, but he still kept an eye out. He asked his men to secretly investigate the second sister's colleagues, but the strange thing is that after the accident they could no longer contact the two. But for all this he never mentioned to Mary. Then he found Mary again, just as they were about to talk, but the third sister ran into him. Although she now knew that Mary had been a slave, but her attitude didn't change. She still chose to support Mary. Unlike her, at this time Ruth was sitting uneasily. Mike also deliberately came to one side. To the housekeeper coldly said, "My wife and I would like to have coffee." This is certainly a declaration of war against Ruth. He also told Mary to sit on the sofa. For a moment the atmosphere was a little awkward, and Ruth was the first to take it. She left in a rage. When the maid brought the coffee, Mike signaled to give it to Mary first, and the reason he did it was to tell everyone that you are now my wife. In this mansion you're as much my wife as you are mine. But then there was a change of pace. Don't worry, no one can hurt you but me. Before he left, he told Mary that he had some business to attend to later. Tell her not to go to her room yet. Mike's intentions were clear. He didn't want anyone to know Mary had something to do with the murder of her second sister. Maybe that's without knowing the truth. He was doing his best to protect Mary. It was clear that Mike had changed. Mary could feel it too, remembering how he used to treat himself, and now he's defending himself against all odds. The more Mike did this, Mary is filled with guilt, and the man who started it all, the rich girl, is overjoyed. The two of them are waiting for the conflict at the mansion to erupt so that they could get their chance, and the mother vowed, "I will let you marry the man you love. You just wait for the good news." And at that moment, Mary did not realize the danger was coming. She came to help in the kitchen, but the maid was treating her strangely. When she wasn't looking, she turned to Ruth and reported her. Ruth already suspected her true identity. It just so happened that Mike wasn't there. She asked the maid to call Mary and try to get some information. A blank expression. Mary didn't dare to look her in the eye. After a long moment of thought, Ruth signals the mediocre to leave. After confirming that no one was around for 4 weeks, Ruth said what she was wondering. "Who the hell are you? How did you meet my son? What is the purpose of marrying here?" At this point Mary told her story. Her family was killed in an accident, but she was saved by the forces of evil. But that wasn't what Ruth wanted to hear. She wants to know how she met her second daughter. What a coincidence. The third sister saw the scene. She thought her mother was starting to accept Mary, turned around and told Mike about it, said they were talking downstairs. Mike realized something was wrong. He knows his mother's nature well. The conversation was a ruse, but the simple Mary didn't see it. When mentioning her murdered second sister, she could see Ruth's grief. What she didn't expect was that Ruth, uncharacteristically, said, "I can understand what you've been through." And then she went on to say, "Who is your master?" So sorry, by this statement, when Mike had finished avenging his sister's death, he had mentioned that Tom was a famous scoundrel in the area. He was the one who killed his daughter. But now Mary said, worked for Tom. But fortunately, Mike appeared in time. That's how Mary kept her mouth shut. Next episode, Ruth learns that Mary used to work for an enemy. Although Mike is always defending Mary, but it aroused her suspicion. She starts to investigate Mary secretly. The daughter-in-law who married with a bright price of 10 million, but her mother-in-law found out that she was a slave. She even worked for her daughter's murderer. But what puzzled her was, not only did her son know about it, he was still defending his wife at every turn, knowing that it was her second daughter she loved most who died. But Mike didn't even bother with his mother, no matter what she was. But now she's my wife. And then he left with a flourish. Then he found Mary alone. The first thing he said was, "You've screwed up everything. I told you not to say who you were." Now that mom knows about it, he's not going to let you off the hook. Obviously Mike wanted to protect Mary, but now that it's over, he couldn't say anything more. Unlike before, he warned Mary, "Don't ever mention this to anyone again." But the more Mike defended Mary, the more suspicious Ruth became. Now the only person she can trust is the housekeeper. Guessing there was something else going on between the two, she's planning to investigate Mary secretly, and that's what Mike was worried about. He knew his cousin had tipped him off. Now he has to go out and do something to keep his cousin stuck in prison forever. In his mind, it was the only way to keep Mary safe, despite Mike's upward excitement. But Mary could vaguely sense that he was trying to protect herself. Whenever Mike was troubled by something, he would come to the old man's store. Although they were not related by blood, but the old man was more like a father to him. He advised Mike not to hesitate. If you like someone, then do your best to protect her. If you hate someone, then use all means to revenge. Hearing this, Mike voiced his fears. He was afraid that his mother would investigate, and then, step by step, he learned Mary was the one who killed his sister. I'm afraid that when the time came, even he couldn't do anything about it. Looking at Mike's troubled face, the old man said what the problem was, although he didn't know if Mary was the murderer, but from the fact that she married Mike, she had already given her life to Mike. As for how to choose, that depends on Mike himself. At that moment, Mary was cleaning up her room. She was just about to put the covers on the floor, but suddenly there was a knock on the door. She thought it was Ruth, but when she opened the door and found out it was her third sister, she said she needed to talk to her. Mary remembered what Mike had told her to do. She looked back at the floor again. She couldn't let her sister know. Then they went into the living room. Sis was just like she always was. She was sympathetic to Mary's plight, but without saying a word. Just as Michael returned to the mansion, in order not to reveal his weaknesses, on the pretext that it was time to go to bed, turned around and took Mary upstairs. Before Mike left, he had clearly told not to talk to anyone. He was about to get angry when he suddenly remembered what the old man had said. Then he calmed himself down. Let Mary go to rest first. At that moment, Mike was very torn. On the one hand, there was his dead sister. On one side was his dead sister, and on the other was poor Mary. He did not know what to do next. That's the way it is. Even if he is rich, there's no guarantee that he'll be happy. When Mary opened her eyes at dawn to find Mike already up, she hurriedly packed up the bedding. Interestingly enough, this time Mike offered to put out his arm and let Mary dress him, and that's not all. He lets her tie his shirt. This sudden change of heart, Mary was at a loss for words. The only thing she didn't notice was that Mike was looking at her gently. But when Mary looked at him, Mike was once again acting his usual cold self. The woman sold herself for $5. She sold herself to her enemy, who was worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Every day like a slave pretending to be a loving couple. She thought she was just acting in front of people, but I didn't expect to act out my feelings. The domineering president gradually fell in love with the enemy in front of him, but the domineering president's mother caught Mary as a slave. She started to investigate her background, and in order to protect her, he ordered his men to keep an eye on the mother while looking for that witness. Not only does he have evidence of his cousin's crime, he also knew about Mike's use of funds to buy Mary. If he could have found him earlier and contained him so that the cousin would never get out, Mary would not be in danger for a while. He didn't know that he wasn't the one who killed her. On the contrary, her colleague is the real killer, but Mike doesn't know any of this. He was trying to protect Mary. Looking at Mike's distraught look, Mary went up to apologize, but it caused Mike's anger more. He dragged Mary over and took out the computer. On it was the cake that Mary brought to his sister. Unfortunately, they didn't finish watching it. Mike was very emotional. He thinks it's all Mary's fault, and now he wants everyone to make it up for him. Then he pins Mary down on the balcony. Coincidentally, Ruth was outside at that moment, so as not to show her up, Mike pulls her up. Just then, he gets a call from his men. He had found the witness. Without thinking about it, Mike and the two of them rush out. Before getting into the car, Mary called Mike. She made her own decision. Her life was in Mike's hands. It was up to her to decide what to do with herself. Mike was about to speak, but he found Ruth not far away. He had to take Mary to the car first. Then he said something profound. No one can hurt you. I'm the only one who can do that. So until then, he'll protect Mary. But before they could leave, Ruth ordered the butler to stay close to Michael. Take note of every detail. But Mike soon realized something was wrong. He pulls over to get away from the housekeeper. He pretended to be out wandering. It was also the first time since the wedding. The first time they'd been to the beach since they'd gotten married. He told Mary to sit down. Then he looked back at the housekeeper. He told Mary to behave naturally. He put his arm around Mary again. The housekeeper saw the scene. Mike tells Mary to lean on his shoulder. But in this moment he seems to be not just acting, but immersed in the role of a husband. But then the thought of his dead sister brought him back to reality. The housekeeper takes out the phone and reports to Ruth there was nothing unusual. The two were indeed very much in love. When Ruth saw the photos, she couldn't believe that her son could fall in love with Mary. The rich girl and Ruth are of one mind. She couldn't understand what Mike was thinking. Just then she got a call from the maid. She said Ruth was in a very bad mood lately. She argued with Mike a lot. This is good news for the rich girl. Whatever it takes to get the man she loves back. But she always had a feeling Mike and Mary were not as in love as they appeared to be. To dispel Ruth's doubts, Mike reached out his arm and lifted Mary's long hair. After seeing the housekeeper leave, Mike also finally relieved. But because of Michael's distinguished status, passers-by soon recognized him and gossiped that Mary was really happy to be married to a young and handsome rich man. Mike held Mary's hand in his hand. When he saw the other party walking away, he pretended not to care and then let go. But he had some important things to do. When he arrived at the appointment, Mike again began to mock him. I've tried everything. He was protecting the murderer of his sister. But what he didn't expect was that just as he was about to enter, Mary found the butler following her. Mike held him down hard. It turns out he didn't leave Ruth at that time. He told the housekeeper not to go back to the mansion. He continued to follow, but no matter how he went, it was too late. Ruth had already arrived with her men. If the witness was taken away by Ruth, not only would she be able to save her cousin, I'm afraid that to repay Ruth, he'll go to Africa to investigate Mary. It will be the biggest crisis for Mary. At that time, even if Mike's help cannot do anything. Next episode preview. Mike saw the witness first. This is not over yet, but the accident happened again. Mary was kidnapped by a mysterious person. in order to take revenge. The domineering president married the murderer of his sister, but now he is in love with each other. He even went so far as to turn against his mother, just to protect Mary's safety. When the people arrived at the warehouse, but found no one there, in response to Ruth's questions, Mike, however, did not panic and said he didn't know where the witness was. But the more Mike did so, the more Mike did this, the more it aroused Ruth's suspicion. She guessed that Mary must be up to something else. They weren't as in love as they seemed. Mike deliberately opened the car door in front of Ruth, as a gentleman, and successfully resolved the crisis. On the way back to the mansion, Mike deliberately slowed down the car. Then he found the right moment to leave Ruth's caravan and took Mary to another warehouse, obviously to protect Mary. Mike had gone to great lengths to protect Mary, but Ruth was always suspicious, pretending to call Mike for something. The first thing she said was, "Where are you now?" But Mike said he was busy right now. "We'll talk about it when we get back." So he had a feeling something was wrong. Butler can't leave so easily. He got out of the car and dialed his men. He told him to take the witness and move immediately. After doing all this, Mike was relieved. When he arrived at the holding area, he told his men to leave first. He wanted to speak to them alone. Mary walked slowly into the room without knowing what was going on. The moment the witness saw Mary, was surprised. Apparently he knew something else, and the reason Mike came to him to find out how much he really knew about Mary. What else did he not know? It turned out that the man was Mike's personal pilot. He had been to Africa with him before, and that's why Mike was in a hurry to find him, to test how much he knew. Mike deliberately asked Mary to stand aside, just to see the man's reaction. Then he said calmly that you were lying about my sister's death. What do you really know? If you want to watch the next episode in advance, please come to my picnic page to see what happens in the next episode in advance with more friends. Looking at Mike's confident look, the man was a little confused. It was this reaction makes Mike more sure of his suspicions. The man saw the situation. The man could only say that he had sold contraband with his cousin. Mike nodded his head in satisfaction. Then he threatened him with his family. If he wants to leave safely, you have to do what I say, and you have to tell me everything you know. Mike asked again how much you know about my sister. As the man was lost in thought, there was a knock at the door. When Mike came outside to find his men down, he realized something was wrong. But when he returned to the room again, a mysterious man appeared. He takes Mary hostage. The atmosphere is tense for a while. Mike is the first to break the silence, asking what the other party wants. To Mike's surprise, he got himself in the wrong place. Because of the arrest of the pilot, the other party's business cannot operate normally. That's why he came to rob him. Mike just stared at him coldly. The pilot is also very important to him. Seeing this attitude of Mike, the man changed his tune. He made a deal with Mary, but Mike remained unruffled. Slowly approaching him, "If you leave now, I can pretend that nothing has happened." Seeing the impending conflict, even the pilot was persuading Mike to let himself and his opponent go. This is the only way to keep everyone safe. But how could Mike let him go? He had gone to so much trouble to find him, just to ensure the safety of Mary. But at this moment, the man threatened Mary. Mike had made a promise to Mary that no one but me, that no one would hurt you. But what the man did now, Mike's bottom line was completely touched. He suddenly pulled out his gun. Now the man was a little confused. He had never met a man like Mike before. He had a hostage in his hand. Now he's in danger. Preview of the next episode. Mike successfully rescues Mary. But just after this crisis, Ruth actually found the second sister's former colleagues. Apparently Mary's secret is about to be exposed. What will Mike do next? The woman she loves is being held hostage. The kidnapper asked for $100 million, but the boss did not hesitate to pull the trigger. With the sound of a gunshot, the kidnapper lost the ability to resist, but the loud sound made the woman deafening. She could only barely get up. But the matter is not over yet. Mike continued to question the witness. "What do you know about my sister's death?" The man had just seen Mike's ruthlessness. He had to tell the truth. He had overheard Mike say during his trip to Africa, Mary was the one who killed his second sister. If Mike would let him go, he promised not to tell anyone about it. After everything was arranged, Mike took Mary away with him, but that incident had cast a big shadow on Mary, and this time Mike changed his usual coldness. He tried to calm Mary down, and jokingly said, "I did it because of you. I can't let my mother know you're the killer." Obviously, in order to protect Mary, Mike is also at great efforts to protect Mary, but on the surface, he still put on a cold face. He took Mary to the country house. The two of them wandered through the woods. Mike didn't know how to say anything, just silently in front of him. When they got to the cottage, he told Mary to fix her clothes. He didn't want anyone to see the difference. He wanted to ask Mary about her injuries, but he couldn't say so because he was ashamed. He could only watch from the sidelines. At this moment, he wished that Mary had nothing to do with the death of his second sister. Just then, a stray dog was found. Looking at such a kind Mary, Mike remembered all the things in the past. He saved himself despite the danger, taking care of the injured stray dog. Plus, what the old man once said, "This girl can give her life to you. That means he will not cheat you." But in order not to fall in love with Mary, Mike can only put this feeling in the bottom of his heart. He opened his mouth and said, "Don't pretend to be so kind. I know you best. You're a murderer through and through." Before he could say a few words, the accident happened again. The mother came to the police station and asked to see the pilot. Ruth's purpose was clear, to find out what happened in Africa. What Mike had told her. What's the connection between the gangster and Mary? Was the man who killed her daughter a gangster or not? But Ruth didn't know that. He had already agreed with Mike. The pilot would not tell Mary's secret. In return, Mike would settle down his family and send them to live abroad. Mike would pay for everything, so Ruth won't get any useful information at all. When Mike arrived at the police station, he pretended not to know and asked, "You've done everything you can to investigate my wife, and now what do you know?" Faced with Mike's mockery, Ruth didn't want to talk any more nonsense, turned around and left the place. But when they returned to the mansion, Ruth said to the maid, "Is my guest here yet?" After receiving a positive answer, Ruth gave a strange expression. Mike was not sure what to make of it, but what he was sure of was, there must be some kind of conspiracy here. Sure enough, when he entered the mansion, he took a good look. The other person was actually a former colleague of his sister. When the man saw Mary, he also looked very calm. Before Mike could say anything, the man opened his mouth and said, "How could she be here?" Preview of the next episode. The man does not say directly, Mary is the one who killed the second sister, but there is a sense of discontent in his words. He also plans to take revenge in his own way. The woman was just having a drink of water in the middle of the night, but nearly lost her life. She was about to return to her bedroom. A man appears out of nowhere, strangled her by the neck. The more the woman resists, the more excited the man becomes. He stares coldly at his prey, ignoring the woman's pleas. Just as he was about to strike, the kitchen light was suddenly turned on. The woman's mother-in-law appeared behind her. This happened to save Mary's life. She looked at the two men with a puzzled expression. She knew that she had invited the man to stay at the mansion. Why was she alone in the kitchen with her daughter-in-law? Seeing Ruth's suspicion, the man explained that he was only in the kitchen to drink water. He happened to run into Mary. Before leaving, he made a threatening gesture. Mary's heart was not at peace for a long time. She found an excuse and went back to her room. When she saw Mike, Mary opened her mouth and said, "Second sister's colleague is not a good person. I always felt that he was dangerous." But what she didn't expect was, Mike did not listen to her. He didn't want to confront him, just wanted to wait quietly for him to leave. Mary hesitated for a long time, did not say what just happened, but he kept thinking back to what the man said. It turned out that he did not only have a grudge against Mary, it was the same with Mike. Just then, there was a noise. When Mary opened the door, she looked around but didn't see anything unusual. This scene was just in time for Mike to see, asking her what was going on. Mary excuses herself for insomnia and then closed the door. But who would have thought? At that moment, the man was hiding next to her. No doubt about it. He was looking for an opportunity to make a move. But Mike didn't know any of this. Mary didn't know how to tell Mike. She couldn't sleep until late at night, looking at Mike in front of her. Mary knew it was all because of herself. That's why she dragged Mike into this. And so she stayed up all night. In a trance, she went downstairs to the study with her bare feet, pushed open the door. There was Mike standing inside. She took out the necklace that her second sister had given her. She gave it back to Mike. Mike looked puzzled. She asks her why she gave it back to her. At that moment, the man suddenly appeared in the room in order to protect Mike's safety. Mary can only say that she plans to leave the place. She was ready to pay for her sins with her life. After saying that, she was ready to leave, but Mike stopped her, and the man stared at them coldly. With a scream, Mary was awakened by a nightmare. It's a good thing what just happened wasn't real. After adjusting to the situation, Mary went to the study to wait for Mike to finish his work. Mary never laughed. She was ready to tell the truth about the man. Before she could say anything, the maid knocked on the door and came in. She said that Ruth and the others had left at dawn. She didn't know exactly where they went. Mike was worried that Mary's identity had been exposed, so he dialed Ruth's phone, but he couldn't get through. Even the housekeeper did the same thing. He was about to go out to look for her. He ran into some people who had returned. Mike didn't know what they had said. It was Ruth who broke the silence first. They said they had gone to the grave of the second sister. Mike asks why he wasn't called. The man opened his mouth and said, "I don't think you should go." And then there was a change of scene. The man who killed her. No amount of punishment is too much. Ruth doesn't understand. Said Mike had already dealt with the gangster. He's finished avenging his sister's death. This seems normal, but Mike knew very well this is a repeated provocation to himself. While Ruth was away, Mike asked him what he really wanted, and the man was no longer in control of his emotions. "I can't get my head around it. I can't believe you married the man who killed your sister." Then the maid brought the photo. The man was even more furious. While mocking Mike, he didn't hide his hatred, and that pissed Mike off. No one had ever dared to talk to him like that. If it wasn't for the protection of Mary, I'm afraid the man didn't even have the chance to talk to him. The tension between the two men was growing. Mike tried to control his emotions, but the man continued to provoke. "You don't deserve to be her brother. Both you and Mary should be punished." Hearing this, Mike said, "This is my woman. You don't get to tell me what to do." Then he told Mary to go to her room. He came to deal with all this, but in the eyes of the men, Mike had fallen in love with Mary. He didn't want to avenge his sister's death. What a coincidence. Mary was seen by Ruth as she went upstairs, and Mike and I were still arguing. In order to protect the woman he loves, the domineering president is willing to turn against his friend. While the two were arguing, Mike's mother appeared behind him. Fortunately, Ruth didn't hear the conversation. Mike explained that the man had something to take care of. He was going to leave the mansion. Seeing Ruth's intention to stay, Mike hurriedly changed the subject, but the man doesn't let Mary off the hook easily. Coincidentally, he went upstairs to pack his things and saw Mary coming out. He said, "I should have finished you off last night." Then he took out the picture of his second sister, so Mary could see who was on it. "You think you'll be safe with Mike protecting you? I'll keep an eye on you." Mary knew that men were dangerous. For a moment she was at a loss for words. Just then, the third sister pushed open the door. The man immediately changed his face. He pretended to be kind and affectionate, but when he returned to his room, he regained his true face. He looked at the things in the room. He picked up the perfume used by his second sister, immersed in his own world. This also shows one thing from the side. He won't let Mary go easily. Even Mike is also the target of his revenge. But for all this, Mike does not know anything. He was glad that the man had finally left, but the man, before leaving, "I really envy you to find such a wonderful wife. He is as kind as your dead sister." After sending the man away, Mike called Mary alone to ask him why he told the man the marriage was a sham. Mary was going to tell the truth. "I was trying to protect you." This made Mike a little confused, but before Mary could say anything else, something unexpected happened again. The third sister pushed in the door. The rich girl and her mother are here, trying to get Mary to come downstairs for a chat, but the conversation was always about the second sister. Mary was a little sad, excuses herself to make coffee for Mike. When the woman saw this, she began to mock. It's the kind of thing a maid should do. The implication is that Mary is not worthy of her current status, but this time Mary didn't let her get away with it. She said that Mike liked her coffee best. He wasn't used to the others. After that, she turned around and left. Mike was in his office at the time. She didn't understand why Mary told the man the marriage was just a game. She doesn't know that Mary is only saying this to protect him. With all the time we've spent together, Mike did feel something, but Mary's words made him a little sad. To keep his head above water, Mike turned on his computer again, watching the video of his second sister before she was killed. His heart was filled with hatred for Mary, but he couldn't have imagined this was the video that would determine Mary's fate. At this point, he was one step away from the truth, but at the most crucial moment, Mary just pushed open the door. Mike still couldn't finish watching the video. He was furious. He started ranting at Mary. Look at the things he has done. The more Mike talked, the angrier he got. Then he slammed the computer shut. He told Mary to leave, and so the two missed the truth again. "I was so worried for them when I saw it. Can't you just watch the video in its entirety?" Mary looked at the picture of her second sister. How she wished she was the one who ate the cake at that time. Now this life for her, every day, is a torment for her. At night, Mary thought again about yesterday's nightmare. The thought that Mike might have been hurt. Mary's heart was hurting. The same goes for Mike. Whenever he was troubled, he would go to the old man's place. He didn't know how to deal with his feelings for Mary. He hated himself for falling in love with his sister's murderer. And at that moment, Mary didn't know what to do either. She went outside to get some air. Unbeknownst to her, someone was staring at her. The next moment. Spoiler for next episode, the crazy man kidnapped Mary. The villain has to come online to push the plot. When Mike finds out that Mary is missing, now he realizes that he can't lose him. The woman was just wandering in the garden late at night, but she didn't expect to almost get herself killed. A man suddenly appeared from behind. Jane covered her unconscious when the woman woke up, but found herself lying in a coffin, and the man looked at her coldly. Then he knocked hard on the wooden board. The loud sound made the woman dizzy, but the more she resisted, the more the man enjoyed the process. There was a scream from the room, but the man didn't care. He wanted to torture Mary slowly, to avenge the woman he loves, not knowing that Mary is not the murderer at all, just a victim like him. After being locked up all night, the man opened the coffin. It was clear that Mary had become his prey. You think because you have a rich man protecting you, I wouldn't dare to touch you? This is just the beginning. You'll pay for what you've done. Then he grabbed Mary, tied her to a post. Then he took out the iron bar and waved it in front of Mary's face. I could have just gotten to know you, but that would have been too easy for you. I lost the woman I loved because of you. Speaking of which, a man has an idea. Since Mike loves you so much, then let him watch his beloved being slowly tortured. But at this time, Mike does not know anything. After talking to the old man, thinking about how he treated Mary during the day, he felt a little bit of guilt again. After dawn, he rushed back to the mansion. Before entering his room, he took another deep breath, but when he pushed open the door, there was no sign of Mary. Mike rushed outside, trying to find Mary, but he looked around and found nothing. Just as he was about to leave, the necklace on the ground caught his attention. Mike took a good look. It was given to Mary by her sister. He knew it was very important to Mary. Mike realized something was wrong. What a coincidence. That's when his phone rang. It was the crazy man on the other line. The first thing he said was, "Didn't you want to avenge your sister's death? Since you can't do it, I will do this for you." Seeing the man wanted to do the real thing, now Mike is completely anxious. He remembered what Mary once said. He had warned the man of the danger. It was his fault for not listening to him. Thinking of this, Mike gripped the necklace tightly. "This is my woman. No one but me has the right to touch her." Then he drove away, and this scene was seen by Ruth. Guess what must have happened? So Mike left in a panic. He knew the man was not kidding. Maybe this time he would really lose Mary, but he wouldn't have thought. Except for Mary, even he was a target of revenge. Then the man returned with his things and put on music specifically. He had already thought of what to do with Mary. That is, the same way his sister was killed, eating the cake and dying in pain. Just thinking about it, the man could not help but feel excited. He stared at Mary coldly. "I've prepared all the ingredients for you. You will make the cake with your own hands. This is for you as a loving couple." She had no choice but to. Mary had no choice but to take out the eggs and start making them intensely. And then she tried to plead with the man to let Mike go. Just as the man's cell phone rang, he also tried to taunt Mary. "I see your husband misses you." When he heard Mary's voice, Mike was relieved. He hurriedly asked if she was hurt, but before he could say a few words, the man hung up the phone again. Then he kept urging around Mary to make the cake quickly. The painful memories of the past came to mind, including the first encounter with Mike. Back Then, Mike was kind enough to save her. If it wasn't for the death of her second sister, maybe the two would have had a different outcome. Thinking about it, she knew very well it was time to end things. The man took out the mysterious potion. She poured it on herself. Then he put it in the oven. The last 5 minutes were left, and Mike finally found out where it was. Mary is being held in a warehouse out in the country. Minutes later, the man brings in a stool, ready for Mary to eat the cake. I want to watch you eat it. But then he thinks that's not good enough. Mike had to see it, so he took out the phone. But what he didn't expect was, Mary suddenly said I could eat it right now. But this has nothing to do with Mike. He doesn't love me at all. Our marriage is just a game. But how can a man believe such words? So he dials Mike's phone, turned the camera on Mary. Mike had thought about revenge a million times, but when the time came, he realized he was used to having Mary in his life. Tell Mary not to eat it. But the man was already in a frenzy. He kept pushing Mary, until finally, Mary said you must not come over. After saying this, he ate the poison cake. Now Mike was completely desperate. Next episode preview. When Mike arrived at the warehouse, he had already lost sight of Mary. He rushes outside. He finally sees Mary dying.